My Gavan and Melanine, and well met indeed. I am Arachír Galudirithon, head of Divide and Conquer and the modding leader, and welcome to the faction overview for Mordor. Now this has been asked for a very long time, but I've held off from the Mordor campaign video because there's very little different about Mordor than there is in Vanilla 3rd Age. We haven't really touched this faction very much. There's a few extra units, as you will see when we come to the second half of the video. And there's a couple of really minor scripts added in, but essentially they're the same faction that you would have played from Vanilla, and that is why I was covering these as close to the end as possible. Similarly with Harad and Run and the few factions remaining. Apart from Anduin, I'm going to do Anduin last, so it plays into the Anduin campaign. But let's dive in with Mordor. How does the game look at the beginning for the forces of the Evil One, the Dark Lord, Sauron the Deceiver? It looks pretty good. After Gondor and Harad, I'm pretty sure Mordor are up there with a claim to the most provinces at game start, with Minas Morgul, Cirith Ungol, Durthang, Morannon, Eisenmouth, the Orc Camp in the centre, Barad-dûr, Morrigost, Thaurband, and Sedagost. You have a pretty hefty starting domain. You did used to have an extra town somewhere around here, but we removed that because it was entirely unnecessary. So you start off really well with a lot of good regions. As you can see, the money coming in from your regions is pretty high. 2,000 coming alone from the two central provinces. And you have a lot of generals, a lot of armies, each in the castle. And as you can see, you get that most famed of general, the Uallari, or the Nazgûl, the Ringwraiths. We'll talk about a little bit about them in a little while. But at the beginning of the game, you're going to look to where you can expand. Where can you head as Mordor? What options have you got before you attack anyone? And your options are northwest. And that's it. To the far east, this large section here is taken by Khand in the Turn 1 auto expansion, so you can't go anywhere there. You already own all of Mordor. And out to the west, this section is taken by Gondor in Turn 1, and otherwise these lands are already held by Gondor. So your only option is the small village here of Gelebrin, which I was a little heavy-handed with a gentleman who didn't know where Gelebrin is, but given that at the very beginning of the game the map even shows you where Gelebrin is, found it very difficult not to be sarcastic in my replies. But that's where Gelebrin is, in the Dead Marshes, which is this region here. That is Rebel. To the north of that, the castle of Dor Norhak, I believe it's called, which is on the spur of the mountains just there, if I'm not mistaken. The hill spur there. That is taken by Dol Guldur in the Turn 1 auto expansion, and Run will border you by the Turn 1 as well. So the only rebel province is Gelebrin just there, and I'm fairly certain if you head north, the two villages between Mirkwood and the mainlands of Rhovanion are claimable as well. They are rebel at the start. So you can head northwest and get a few rebel provinces. But with a lack of rebel provinces, of course, you're going to be meeting resistance very early on, and that comes in the form of Gondor, as I'm sure you're all aware. This faction needs the least said about it, as it's perhaps the most well-known faction outside of the Lord of the Rings fanatics. You start allied to everyone that wishes to further your cause, so the Eastlings are your allies, Shadow of Mirkwood, Orcs of the Misty Mountains, Remnants of Angmar, Harad, and Khand. They're all allied to you. You may notice that Umbar are missing from that list, and that gives an Umbar player the opportunity to reassert dominion of the Black Númenóreans, or Dark Númenóreans over Middle-earth. You'll also notice that Dunland and Isengard are not on that list. So Isengard and Dunland don't start allied to you, and that comes from the nature of Saruman. He's not proclaimed himself yet, and he does that at the start. Normally Isengard and Mordor, if you're playing against them, they form their alliance about 10 turns in, something like that. But rarely did Dunland ally with Mordor in my few campaigns, although they used to quite a lot in the past, actually. So these two will normally come into the fold of Mordor quite early on. And Enedwaith are unknown. Sometimes they side with Mordor, sometimes they don't. So do stay tuned with those, or keep an eye out for their messenger, as he may bring messages of peace. Right, your immediate neighbours, if you don't already know, Gondor is to your west with their 5 starting regions. Pretty tough nut to crack in the early game. That is one of your only ways out of your domain. The other way being north, where you'll meet your allies of the Shadow of Mirkwood, your allies of Rhûn, who border on the mountains just there. But if you do push through all the way up here, you'll come to the heart of Dorwinion, which will oppose you. And of course, the elves are at the very, very top of Mirkwood, but they're a whole map away, so To the east, you are surrounded by allies as well. You've got Khand, as I've already mentioned, and to the south, you have Harad, and those are your immediate neighbours. Almost all of them you are allied to, leaving Gondor as the only enemy. Right, in terms of economy, how do the orcs do? Well, they actually do rather well, thanks to their numerous unique provinces. Because of the way unique settlements work, they tend to have to be the highest possible building structure of that type. So a unique castle is often the largest possible castle, and a unique town is often the largest possible town. So the capacity to earn money at the beginning of the game for Mordor is very high, with Barad-dûr being as large as it can be, Morannon, Durthang, Cirith Ungol and Minas Morgul all being large settlements. So citadel there, citadel there, citadel there, citadel there again, and I believe Barad-dûr is also a citadel. So you can earn quite a lot of money because you've already got the highest possible town level. Their infrastructure is already built up pretty well, as you can see with all the roads dotting about Mordor. So it's not very difficult to make money as Mordor. This is especially given that your troops are very, very cheap, and the regions of Morrigost, Thorband and Saragost, as you can see, brief look on the map, have a lot of resources. So if you can get trade rights up quite quickly with a lot of your allies, these regions can become very profitable. But they are kept in check somewhat by the fact that they are old castles and they are not towns, so they can't get the economic bonuses that towns get. Other than that, there's not too many restrictions on the orcs, opposed from the standard restrictions that you can't upgrade castles. So you won't be able to upgrade any of your castles, but Morrigost, Thorband and Saragost already begin as wooden castles to counter that somewhat, so you can at least get those there. You also get, obviously, the e-Hûdoll stone straight away. If you are wondering, it's called the e-Hûdoll stone because Barad-dûr didn't have a palantir, a seeing stone, as you might imagine, and it was taken from Minas Ithil upon its capture a long time ago by the Witch King, and he transported the palantir to Barad-dûr. So that's why it's called the e-Hûdoll stone, and it gives you bonuses, as you can see. You get an increase in tradable goods from Barad-dûr, a melee weapon bonus out of Barad-dûr, and you can retrain your troops faster in the tower, in the Dark Tower. Which is what Barad-dûr means, if you're ever asked. It just literally means Dark Tower. Anywho, so there's not too many restrictions opposed from the usual restrictions on orcs, and they can earn money quite well. Now, in terms of guilds, or the buildings covered, you get the Fighter's Pit, and you get all 3 levels, as you can see there. So it starts off with the Brawler's Pit with experience bonus, goes to a Brawler's Hall, wider experience bonus, and Gothmog's Hall, even more experience bonus. Do bear in mind that that is not this Gothmog, Gothmog the Scarred. Far from it, it is Gothmog, the original chieftain of the Balrogs, slain by Ecthelion in the fountain of Gondolin. Ecthelion slew Gothmog a long, long time ago, but he was the greatest Balrog potentially that ever lived, and so it's named after him. But other than that, those are the guilds that Mordor get. There's not too many others. You get your Shrines of Melkor, your standard shrines obviously, and you get inns as well, as you can see there. Or torture complexes, as they're actually called. I'm not entirely certain why the dungeon has that image, but the butchery and torture chamber share those. Might have to have a little look into that. So that is the building restrictions. As you can imagine, you don't get a very high smithing level. You only get up to level 3, if I am not mistaken. 1, 2, 3. So you're not going to get the finest armour in Middle-earth. Right, but that links us nicely onto the scripts. What few scripts have we added to Mordor that you may not see? Or features, let's call this section features. Well, first of all, Gothmog himself has his own unique battle model, as you can see there. Campaign model, which is a nice little twist. He's got his own little image, and he's a very, very strong general. Of course, as I have already mentioned, you get the Olyri, the Nazgûl, and they're dotted around. They are very strong generals indeed, and they are coupled with their own little script which allows them to respawn if they're ever killed. And they take something, I think, between 10 and 15 turns to return to Barad-dûr, and the script will only stop if you ever lose Barad-dûr, but if you're playing as Mordor, the chances are you'll never lose Barad-dûr. So they all respawn, including the Witch King. They'll all come back at Barad-dûr. You may wonder as to why you've only got, you should have 6 Nazgûl, and you may wonder as to why you've only got 6 Nazgûl, and it's because the other 3 Nazgûl, of course, lead to the Shadow of Mordor, so you don't have those 3. But the Nazgul's bodyguard is what makes them the real formidable, really, really frightening on the battlefield. As I will cover those, I'll do a brief highlight of their battle model in the in the second half of the video. Other features of Mordor are the Tribes United script, which you'll see at the very beginning of the game. You'll get a scroll popping up, and it means that out of the Black Gate, it either is after the barracks event or it takes... it needs a 75% requirement. As you can see there, from the Black Gate you can recruit... Oh, it just needs an end turn, actually. That's why that's not lined up yet. But from the Black Gate you can recruit these units. And they're some units from Harad, some units from Run. It will take one end turn to do because the game just has to double check that you're allied with them. And it is a script in that regard. As long as you're allied to Harad and you're allied to Run and you're allied to Khand, independently, you don't have to be allied to all three to get the units. If you're allied to Harad, you'll get Haradrim. If you're allied to Run, you'll get Run. And if you're allied to Khand, you'll get Khandish units. Harad and Run's units come both out of the Black Gate, as you can see listed there. Southern Lancers, Warband, Lok Gamprim, Lop Inasrim. Some of them will require the barracks event. Or they're available, like you can get one unit of them before the barracks event and they're more readily available. But the Khandish units come out of their own building, unique to Barad-dûr, the Variag mustering gown. You can get the units, as you can see there. You should be familiar with that because Harad and Run both get that same feature, although I've only done the Haradrim video, but you can get that. And then it upgrades after the barracks event to allow you to train even more Khandish troops. But you'll need to be allied to Khand to be able to build it in Barad-dûr, or you can backstab Khand, come and claim their lands and build that building in their lands, which will allow you to train a lot more Khandish units, but of course you're very far away from the battle lines. Other than that, Mordor's script is of course the infamous One Ring script. Now, I've never played as Mordor, but if you do head to the very top of the map you will see Sauron already there. I don't know if after turn 1 he goes off the map. I'm assuming he does. If he doesn't, then I apologise. But Sauron will only return to Barad-dûr once the ring is brought back, and it is purely just an oversight in the script that he is there at the beginning. I'm fairly certain if I end the turn... Well, I can do it and we can talk actually. He should go off map, but he may not. It may be a circle around it. It's briefly worth noting that the respawning Nazgul script means that you will never be able to adopt any Orc generals. So if you can adopt Orc generals, either something's gone wrong or the script has been changed and I'm just unaware. But generally speaking, you shouldn't be able to adopt anyone because of the way the Nazgul work. And interestingly, no, Sauron does stay there. So I'm pretty sure I remember Geostode saying that had to happen for the way that we have the script, the way that we have the Immortal Nazgul working. So do just ignore that Sauron's there. But Sauron will only return when you get the ring back. And to get the ring, it will pop up with a message saying the ring has been found. You have to take the region that the ring is in. And then you have to move a general into that town, and he has to have 7 or less ancillaries. If he has 8 ancillaries, he can't get the ring, and that's why you're not getting it. He has to have room to take the ring, and the maximum number of ancillaries any general can have is 8. So he needs to have 7 or less. And then the ring will come in, he'll get the ring after a time has passed. It can take a little while, you just have to wait. And then you just have to bring him back to Barad-dûr and wait in the Barad-dûr region, Eastern Gorgoroth, and... you just have to wait it out, and eventually Sauron will get the ring, and he'll return, and you get Sauron. Now, it's worth noting that due to the annoying bug from ages past, I think there are 3 Saurons in the battle model. I don't think there's just one. This has been tested out and tried out many different types and many different ways, and I'm fairly certain that Moss may have a temporary fix, but I'm pretty sure that I'm fairly certain that their fix works as soon as you get Sauron, but over time he does get the new bodyguards back. I've not seen anyone find a way to 100% mean you make it so you can only have one Sauron on the battle map. So there's no real way around it, and at this stage there's too few of us to really look any in depth at that, so you just have to take my word and suck it up, basically. But that is pretty much it for the campaign side of Mordor. There's no real need to give tips and tricks. You want to hit Gondor as fast as you can, but other than that, the world's your oyster. Your victory conditions are essentially to control everything that you possibly can. You have to defeat a lot of factions, Rohan, Dol Amroth, Gondor, and hold 60 regions, which is a lot. So they have large victory conditions. But other than that, Mordor is a faction I have never played as, but I'm sure they're reasonably enjoyable. In terms of the garrison script, you will only get a garrison in your starting regions that you see at the beginning of the game there. You'll only get a garrison in those regions. Outside of those regions, you'll get a garrison in the homelands of the Shadow of Mordor, Run, Harad, Khand, Umbar, Misty Mountains, Angmar, and Isengard. And in those home regions, you will get a garrison as well. And outside of, in the capital regions of other non-evil factions, you won't get any garrison whatsoever. But in the regions that lie between starting regions, you will get a garrison once you upgrade the towns, as I have said many, many times. But that's how the garrison script works. Right, and this is Mordor's army. You get 2 units of cavalry, and one of them are beasts. So you're not a cavalry faction, not by any stretch of the imagination. You don't really get any cavalry at all. So you do have to keep that in mind. And as you can imagine, and as you can see from the units, you are a faction which specializes in large numbers of, well, tat, essentially. Large numbers of not very good units. That is Mordor's angle. Also, do bear in mind that these, the way I'm lining these up is not reflective of how they are available in the barracks event. It may well be, to be honest. Not going to lie to you. I'm fairly certain that the way I'm lining it up is in the barracks event. So these 2 set tiers before come pre-barracks event, and then this final tier is after the barracks event. But it's worth putting these units here in their own category because they are all unique units. AOR units for Mordor are the Morgul Chosen, Sauron's Will, the Great Beasts of Gorgoroth, and in a way Black Númenóreans, because you can't actually train them. Do note the Uruk Bodyguard are that unit just there. That's your mainstay Orc Bodyguard unit. But let's start from the bottom with your basic throwaway trash units. Now these are your Scouts, the Orc Band, and the Orc Raiders, with an Archer unit, a Spear unit, and a Sword unit. So we'll start with the Raiders. Orc Raiders, as you can expect, not very good. They are better than Snagga. Do bear in mind that Mordor's worst unit are still better than the Misty Mountains' worst unit. The Misty Mountains are the real throw as many units as you can at them. Mordor do have a few specialist units which deal damage instead of numbers. So these are your base unit. They get a defensive 4, which is nothing to shout of, nothing to scream of. Gondor gets double that on their first unit. Their attacks 2 to charges 2. They're not going to do very much damage. And as is reminiscent of almost all orcs, they get terrible morale. Although do note that they get very good morale response, so they can deal with morale shocks quite well, but they have a terrible morale pool to come from anyway. As they are orcs, they get a bonus in forest and snow, but they fight worse in desert and grassland. Grassland favours orcs' enemies, and the only way to really highlight that is showing that orcs don't get a bonus in grassland, basically. It's very minor, those things. They won't affect it too much, but do bear in mind that if you come up against Rohan on grassland, they're going to have a massive advantage over you. Or they're going to have an advantage over you. Counter statements there. Next up are your Orc Band. These are your real first tier unit. As you can see, 1 defense coming from their shield, 1 attack, 1 charge. They can do a Shiltrum, which is reminiscent of poor units. They do get a bonus against mounted units because they've got a spear. But they are poor and poor. They are the first unit to break on the field, and they will get cut down by the 1,000 if you leave them in combat with units better than them. But supporting them are the Scouts, the Orcish Scouts. These are your first Archer unit, and for Orcs they are not that bad on the Archer front. 2 missile, 2 melee, 2 charge. Average across the board there. Defense isn't very good, as you'd expect. They're quite good at hiding in woods, but they can't hide anywhere. They can use flaming missiles, which is good, but like their Orc raiding counterparts, they are also impetuous morale response. So they are likely to deal with morale shocks a little better than the band, the Orc Band, their neighbours there. But they're still, with a poor morale, nothing to shout about. Now it's worth mentioning, as we're with an Orc faction again, that whilst their accuracy is very low, they are in a sub-category unique to Orcs. I've said this many times, but I'll say it again. If we take humans as humans are the middle line Archer unit, so a human unit that says they have an average accuracy will have an average accuracy. But an orc unit that says it has an average accuracy would have the equivalent of a low accuracy for a human. So the orcs are always worse at every tier than anyone else. So a very low orc unit in terms of accuracy means it has the worst accuracy in the game. They are only beaten beaten. I don't really think that that applies, but the only unit worse than them in accuracy are the snagger units of the Misty Mountains. So do bear that in mind. Right, the first sort of units that are actually going to be able to hold anyone back are the Morannon Guard, spear units. As you can see, vast improvement. They almost have double the defense of the Orc Band, the tier below them. Their attack is slightly better, their charge is one better as well. They can do shield wall, so the first unit can do shield wall, and they've already got better morale, and they are again impetuous. So they're your first dependable unit. They're not gonna take the world on their own. They're not incredible, but they are dependable. So do bear that in mind. Supplementing them are your reasonable orc archers. Better across the board than the scouts. Much better defense, 3-3-2 as opposed to 2-2-2. Again, they can use flaming missiles, but still note that they can't use stakes yet. So they still can't use stakes. But their morale is also improved, their morale response is improved, and again their accuracy is improved. So the Orc Archers are better in every way than the Orc Scouts. And despite the fact that there's around about 70 less than the Scouts, they're still far more useful on the battlefield, and you should try and make your Archer ranks predominantly filled with Orc Archers rather than Orc Scouts. Right, the first unit that's actually really quite good and to be feared by your enemy are the fearsome Orc Maulers with their ridiculous executioner-style weapons. Very impractical, yet they look very cool. And that's because this unit are your first Berserker-style unit, your first shock infantry. They're effective against armor, they've got a high attack and a very good charge to deal with that. Not a particularly good defense though, so do bear that in mind. They're not going to survive for ages, but they will take a lot of enemies with them as they go down. Very, very useful, as I've said many times as well, to hold the enemy with the Morannon Guard, then use the Orc Archers to thin them out, and then when the time is right, use the Maulers to smash into the side of the enemy and cripple them in their attack. Again, average morale response, the same sort of bonuses as their colleagues in the middle tier. And as I say, these units are all available before the barracks event. So whilst Gondor might have better units than you, they have fewer units than you. So you can swarm them with numbers and just number of armies as well. Because obviously you can only get 20 units in each banner army. You will have to share the load out amongst other armies. But the general rule will always be if Gondor can field one full banner army, you'll be able to field 2.5. So do bear that in mind, and that's reflected in your costs. Your units are very cheap. Not as cheap as Misty Mountains, but cheap. So do keep that in mind. Right, the next tier, really, I should have separated them a little bit, because these three units are kind of one up there, and then the Orcs are a little bit in front of them. Now, the three Uruk units are your mainline elites. These are available everywhere. They're very readily available. If anyone who's familiar with playing against Mordor will know that after the barracks event, these units are everywhere. You just can't get away from them. Mordor loves them. And with good reason, because they're the first unit that can actually really do damage. A 16 defense means they can wash away the Gondor's lower tier units. The charge isn't very good, but they have a very high attack. They're very ferocious. They also have good stamina, which is a nice added feature. And they start to get good morale, impetuous morale response again. So these ones aren't going to run too quickly, and they'll be able to take a lot of enemies down with them. They're a very aggressive unit, and they are the aggressive of the three at this top tier. The defensive equivalent of the top tier are the Halberds. Very good against cavalry, as you might imagine. They're essentially pikemen, but they're not. They're halberdmen, but similar sort of. You use them in a similar sort of way. Again, they're effective against armor, so these are slayers in every sense of the word. Very high attack, very solid defense, pike wall to keep the enemy at bay, and they're effective against armor. They're really dependable if used correctly. Good morale to support that as well, and of course bonuses against cavalry. These are one of Mordor's best units that are available everywhere, and I would highly recommend you get them if you can. Supplementing them at this tier are your Uruk archers. Not much to say about these, they're archers. Marked improvement on the two units before, with a 5-5-3 instead of a 1-1-1 and 2-2-2. Or 2-2-2 and 3-3-2, sorry. Defense is improved, but not as good as their other Uruk counterparts, because they are archers. They can use sharpened stakes, so you can at least counter the cavalry charges from, well, wherever you put them. Again, good morale, impetuous morale response. They start to get average accuracy, which is still only low human accuracy, but it's still better than very low accuracy, which you have down the bottom here. So Uruk archers, the 3 Uruk units should really make the bulk of your army once you reach the barracks event. There's no reason not to get them because they're value for money over the units below. Supplementing them, but only available in certain regions, are Morgul Chosen, fearsome unit, and Sauron's Will, an incredible unit. Morgul Chosen are only available in Minas Morgul, and Sauron's Will are only available in Barad-dûr. Morgul's Chosen are the only heavily armoured unit that you actually have. There you can see they're outfitted in heavy armour, stealing their armour techniques from the men of Angmar, the Uruks of Angmar, sorry, but with a twist on it with the Morgul shield, and they are going to war with these spears. Or billhooks in some cases, by the looks of it. They, as their armour would suggest, are very heavily armoured. 4 orcs. So they have these, in the numerous times I've ever fought against these, they've always been the last on the field, just purely through their survivability. Their attack's nothing special, charge is nothing special, but the defence keeps them going, good stamina to boot, and they have good morale and good morale response. Of course, they're effective against cavalry as well, so they're just a very good defensive unit. Such is the nature of Minas Morgul, as their unique unit would be a defensive unit, to keep Morgul in the hands of the Dark Lord. Sauron's Will are their direct counterpart and form the ridiculously aggressive side of the AOR, which are these 2 units. And by that you can see straight away how I mean about aggressive. They have a better defense than the Morgul Chosen, owing to their superior use of their armour. The Morgul Chosen are just weak orcs in big armour, whereas Sauron's Will are hardly trained and well equipped, and they make better use of their armour, which gives their higher defence stat. Their attack is also incredibly strong, 15 attack, and it's also effective against armour. They are beasts, they can take down any unit very quickly. They are also inspired nearby troops, so it's useful to have these on the field, and they frighten nearby enemy infantry. They've also got an incredible charge, so you can charge them into the enemy and they'll do a ton of damage, but then they'll also stay there and stay alive thanks to their high defense. They are also one of Mordor's most expensive units, so you do have to bear that in mind. They've got better morale than their Morgul neighbours and better morale response, and they also get a bonus against cavalry due to their ridiculous ferocity. So rather than being a counterpart to the Chosen, they are sort of better than the Chosen in almost every way. But these 2 are still far better than your Uruks at any level. As example, you can see there, their defense is only 13, the Uruk Halberds, whereas the Morgul Chosen, it's up to 20. So whilst the Sauron's Will are all round better than the Chosen are still very good and should always be got whenever possible. The only other unit this tier, you can't train these of course, but they're your bodyguards. They have a defense between the AORs and between the Uruks, and a high attack to cover that as well. They're very, very good Uruk bodyguard. They're a really strong unit, and they defend the generals incredibly well. There's no danger to your generals when Uruk bodyguard are the governing body. They are susceptible to cavalry charges because they are infantry with no bonus against cavalry. So you do have to watch out for enemy cavalry. Right, now we come to your real uniques. We'll start with the trolls because many of you are familiar with trolls and I've covered them in other videos, so we'll just very briefly look at their stats. These are your basic trolls, mountain trolls, available before the barracks event. High attack, high charge, high defense, 5 hit points. Very strong unit. You can see trolls covered in the Misty Mountains video, the Angmar video, and the Shadow of Mirkwood video, so if you want to learn more about trolls, see there. There's their stats, locked morale, which is very, very useful. Bonus against cavalry. Next to them are their far stronger counterpart, and perhaps the most feared unit you can see on the battlefield until the great beasts were invented that Mordor could ever field, the Ologhai Trollfolk. Very strong indeed, very, very dependable unit. 6 hit points as opposed to their neighbours 5. 38 total defense overall, 5 better. A better attack, better charge, they're just all round better. I'm fairly certain their morale is locked. For some reason I've put the locked on the morale response, not the morale, that's annoying. They get a bonus against horses, but not against camels and olifants, as they do. I think that's just a text oversight. They both get the same bonuses against the same things. So that is just because it's not in the text. So I apologise for that. But the Arachír very, very strong. I will say, as I've said in every troll video, just to remind you, trolls are not cavalry. They are counted as infantry, which means that spearmen and pikemen get no bonus against trolls whatsoever. To kill trolls, you need either armor piercing or arrows. And those two things will bring down trolls very quickly. Arrows are not as good against the Arachír because they've got a very high armor stat. Whereas the mountain trolls bring most of their defense from their defense skill, the Arachír comes mostly from their armor. So arrows aren't as good against them, but anything that's armor piercing is very good against trolls. The best thing to kill trolls with is siege equipment, but it's quite tricky to keep it on the field long enough to target the trolls. Right, speaking of the trolls, you also get the troll catapult, which were covered briefly in the Misty Mountain video, because they also get this unit. They're just very, very good catapults, and then once the catapults are done, they've got trolls governing them. There's nothing really else to say about the troll catapults. They're really useful in all types of battle situations, because the catapults can bring down units first, or bring down walls or gates, and then once you're done with the catapult, you've got a unit of trolls. So there's no reason not to train these. They're really useful. The next unit are the Black Númenóreans. These are the Nazgûl bodyguard. Very strong units. Many's the time I've played as Gondor and lost Boromir to a charge of these foul beings. 24 defense, very high indeed, most of that coming from armor. Their attack is 11, their charge is 7. They inspire nearby troops and they frighten enemies. They frighten nearby enemies full stop, regardless of whether they're on foot or mounted. And of course, being generals' bodyguards, you can't train these units, but their upkeep is not massively high, so they're quite a good payoff. They're always useful to have, and if you can keep your Nazgûl alive, because 15 turns without a Nazgûl is quite a long time for Nazgûl. Their morale is locked, which is why they never run. That's why you always see Nazgûl fight to the death. They're just incredibly strong units, the Black Númenóreans. Very good all-round cavalry. There's not very many of them, and no, they're not as good as, say, the Swan Knights or the Lokinus Rim of Run, but they are still very, very strong. And given that Mordor, as you can see, have no cavalry whatsoever apart from the great beasts and these bodyguards, you'll be very thankful to have these in your army when you do get them. And that brings us on to the final unit, the Great Beasts of Gorgoroth. Here they are, looking very dim with their eyes looking out sideways, but still looking incredible. As you can see, they have a shack tower thing with 6 orcs in it that will throw their javelins at the enemy without any qualms whatsoever. These are basically just elephants. So elephants from the original game, but with a different look. So whereas Mumakil are elephants, but just scaled up massively, these are more normal style elephants. You can see their stats there, so they're much better than trolls. Very high attack. Their missile attack is 8, which is quite good. So they're very useful to use as missiles throwing over your lines before you charge them in. They have 8 hit points. They've got to die 8 times. They have a 28 defense. So not as good as the trolls on the defense, but a good defense still, nevertheless. They inspire nearby troops, which is very useful. And as I've already said, they have javelins. Their stats down the bottom, they have unwavering morale, ridiculously high morale, but do note that it's not locked, so they can flee. They get a bonus against cavalry, and they get a bonus in grassland and snow, but a negative in desert and forest. This is predominantly because Gorgoroth is essentially grassland, and that's where they come from. And by that, that is indeed where they come from in the game. They can only be trained in the 4 provinces of Barad-dûr, Seregost, Morrigost, and Thorband. Those are the only places you can train the Great Beasts. So do keep an eye on them. They come out of the same building that the Trolls come out of, but they come out of the top tier. Or they come out straight away, I think, actually. But you can get them reasonably quickly. They're just really good. They can run amok, though. Do bear that in mind. They will run amok, and they'll run all over your troops. And they can also run through your troops. And they'll take some of your men with them. So try not to let that happen. Always post them on the edges and keep them out of your troops' line of fire. So whereas Trolls will just run through your units, Great Beasts will run over your units. Right, You can also see from this quick lineup that if Mordor are anything, they are not a ranged faction. You will struggle very much when you come up against the elves, for example, if you make it to to Mirkwood, because their archers will shred you long before you can get into combat. So you have to come up with some tricksy tactics to keep the elves at bay, otherwise they will run all over you. Alright, let's turn all this off. We're up against a Gondor army of every unit that I could click on. There's some Fountain Guard moving at the forward there. Gondor infantry, Gondor Citadel Guard, Lebanon men at the back. And they're all charging in. Oh, something's coming for our great beasts. Let's just charge them behind. There they go. Lumbering along. Up against melee militias. They'll probably destroy them. Although they do have a slow attack animation to make up for the fact that they do a lot of damage. Elsewhere, no one's actually in battle yet. Well, the Fountain Guard appear to be jogging, power walking their way to the front lines. Oh, look, there's Gilead Guard. Very cool pike unit. Oh, the troll catapults are firing. Did a right number on those spearmen. Took loads of them out. How goes it with the great beasts? As expected, they've slaughtered the militia. Each swing of the beast's head takes down a few cavalrymen. And their javelins, that's the beauty of this unit, same as Mumakil. Whilst the unit attacks, as you may have noticed just there, the javelin men still fight. So whilst the beast is attacking, the javelins still throw their javelins. All round very useful unit. And those guardsmen coming in column formation is doing them no favours. But we can have a look at the lines as they have met. Some random guard up against peacekeepers, I believe, yeah. Or the Fountain Guard up against maulers. Will they keep them at bay? Fountain Guard, I absolutely love Fountain Guard. Fountain Guard have a unique upgrade look as well, so this is how they look like unupgraded, and then when you upgrade them they get a visual change. Oh wow, look at that. The Guardians of Minas Ithil have torn into the Uruks there in shield wall formation. Wardens of the White Tower have engaged at the end. Another incredible unit of Taro M's. Could not turn them down, they just look too cool. See the Gondor video, which feels like a year ago now, but I think it's only a couple of months. But have a look at that for the full Gondor breakdown. There's more units fighting over there. You'll notice that the captains of each orc unit are black Númenóreans with their two-handed swords. That's about the only time you'll see them. Aside from, of course, them up here, where they are fighting against General's Bodyguard of Gondor. And that's about it. That's the forces of Mordor. There's some Sauron's Will against the Axemen of Lasarnak. Both armor piercing, both high attack, both high defense. That would be an interesting battle. Sauron's Will would take it because they are better than the Axemen, but I think the Axemen look very cool. And you can see how many more archer units they've got as opposed to us. Never really ran the trolls in. But everybody's seen what trolls are like. Everybody's played vanilla. And if you haven't, I would recommend you play vanilla before you play DAC, just so you're familiar with the concepts of the game itself. Mostly because in the vanilla campaign at the very beginning of the game, a scroll pops up informing you of all of the unique features of Third Age Total War that you will not see in Medieval 2 Total War. So things that the game has changed from the base game. Now in DAC we removed that scroll because we assume that everybody's played vanilla. But unfortunately some people haven't. Oh look, they're running amok. So I do recommend that you play before you play DAC. At least just one campaign, at least just to load it up and read the scroll. Oh, there's some Pelargia Marines, or Lebanon Marines as they were renamed. Looking very cool now. But anyway, that will conclude the Mordor video. So, with Mordor done and out of the way, I hope to do Ered Luin next, followed by Run, followed by Dunland, and then ending with Anduin. And that's the play out for the next videos of these type. Thank you very much for watching, if indeed you have, as always. I am Arachír Galudirithon, the modding leader of Divide and Conquer. Currently we're all hard at work. Geosode fixing the Moria script. Hummingbird still doing miscellaneous fixes here and there to unit stats and unit looks. And I'm predominantly just fixing bugs that are getting reported when I get a spare moment. So we're still hard at work, and it is still very much in production. So thank you very much for playing up to this point, and thank you very much for watching. If you have any qualms, queries, or questions, feel free to post them here on YouTube, where I hope to now answer them in the Let's Play videos. I've been keeping a note of questions that have been asked that I can answer. I think it's a little bit better to actually audibly answer the questions rather than just type it out. So do stay tuned for some answers to some questions that have been posted. I will do those in the Let's Plays, as I say. Otherwise, feel free to head to Total War Center or ModDB and ask questions there, although ModDB is not monitored anywhere near as much as Total War Center or YouTube. Feel free to subscribe if you wish to see more Third Age DAC related videos, or if you just enjoy listening to me talk about the game and talk about Lord of the Rings and the lore. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and until we speak again, dear friends, Navar Naden Pedimad Melonin, and farewell.